I'm Rewa Wright. I'm a co-author with Simon Howden of the paper Extensions of Reality and the Technological Virtual. Today we're going to be having a wide-ranging conversation about plants, data and people. We'll be touching on Indigenous identity, data colonialism, plant co-composition, and how we might gesture towards some form of post-humanist thinking in our art-making practice. But first, I'd like to pay my respects to the First Nation elders of Meanjin, on whose lands I record this video from today, lands which were never ceded and are still subject to the ongoing process of colonialisation in the nation state of Australia. So I pay my respects to the Gubbi Cubbi, Yagara, Jagera, Turrbal peoples of the Meanjin area. In Western cosmology, Christian cosmology, plants were right there at the beginning in the Garden of Eden. But in true humanist style, it was Adam and Eve who got to write that narrative. And Adam became the main protagonist while Eve was the deceitful sinner, drawn into sin by an animal, the snake, and by eating a plant, the apple. So from this fall, sort of understanding of plants and animals as somehow evil and leading us towards sin. So how do we now try to reinstate a positive relationship with plants? How do we understand plants as something other than, passive and aesthetic? The Indigenous culture that I'm a part of, being a New Zealand Māori from the Te Oreohau Hapu and the Ngāpuhi tribes of the north of Aotearoa, New Zealand, we have a different understanding of how plants and humans interact together because we consider that we're actually part of the same bloodlines. So we don't have a separation between the animal world, the plant kingdom, and human civilization. Those three aspects are actually deeply entangled to the point where we have ancestors which are actually trees. There's a famous ancestor from the Te Oreohau Hapu in the Waipua forest who is actually a tree called Tani Mahuta. He's a kauri tree, thousands of years old. So from this Indigenous thinking, my artwork proceeds with the idea that we can form these vibrant connections with plants because essentially we're composed of the same matter. We're both self-organizing systems with chemical and electrical forces, and by harnessing those forces we can create and co-compose together. Karen Barrage, the quantum physicist turned philosopher, in her book Meeting the Universe Halfway, has a concept of situated agency as a form of knowing, whereby every species on the planet and also, inanimate materials such as even geological materials have a sort of vibrant atomic ambient background that they reside within, and all of their capacities come out of this form of situated agency. Acknowledging plants as active producers of signals, as active creators and co-composers, rather than as passive aesthetic objects as they were traditionally framed by humanist discourses. Of course, this is building on some of the pioneering work by John Lifton and Richard Lowenberg from 1976. So all through the late 1970s, these artists and engineers were exploring ways that we could connect with plants using EEG sensing, various types of biosensor, and combining visual data from plants and humans in the same performative installation space. So building on this idea that plants can be live performers alongside humans using data networks creates a sense of co-composition and communion between the plant world and the human world. On top of that, we have the algorithmic world, and of course that's the ambient background to our digital lives on planet Earth. connecting back up with this concept of the technological virtual, what we find is on the one hand we have nature sitting in our lap, as Donna Haraway might say, and on the other hand we have computational networks, we have data, we have ways that we sense along with computers, we have the Internet of Things, drawing us all into this big entangled web, where we're essentially codependent or interdependent on non-human forces. Humans are no longer at the center of this arrangement. We are no longer anthropos, because we are co-creating every day with the non-human to the extent that we can no longer be placed at the center of a coherent universe, at the center of a logic that we control. Indeed, under the terms of the Anthropocene, planet Earth runs on our home browsers. Along with Donna Haraway, we can see that the Anthropocene is also the Capitalocene or the Plantationocene. If we follow with Anna Singh, we'll find the mushroom at the end of the world. Timothy Morton takes another step further when he says that we're already in the Bacteriocene. Okay, and if we think of the little bacteria that live upon our bodies, on our faces, our fingertips, and of course we're still within a COVID-19 pandemic, suggesting that actually our bodies are very effective hosts for all manner of bacteria and viruses, which we may not also welcome. Either way, all of these signs gesture toward the dysfunction of the term Anthropocene and the idea that this term might already be redundant. Perhaps it was a term that was never appropriate in the first place, since it was always vested in spurious notions of human control, of human centrism. So founded as thought on the premise that we must draw a line between humans and non-humans. Nature didn't have a brain, humans had the brain. We were the embodiment, as Descartes said, of cogito ergo sum. What we suggest in our paper is we might refigure the term Anthropocene with an S, so that it becomes a speculative space where, rather than thinking about the data tabulation, the visual imaging of the Earth from space, these scientific numbers that we're constantly given about climate change and human impact on the Earth, we might add in that S to Anthropocene and think of it as a speculative field, a field that encourages fabulation, not tabulation. In our artwork, we're thinking about ways we might reinscribe data with sensation and emotion, sound and touch, to create a contact zone of speculative fabulations, signaletic energies, and tactile sensing. Generative adversarial networks are well known in machine learning, where they sort, filter, sift through various types of data in order to create recognizable patterns for machines to learn from. So unsupervised learning, as it's often called, occurs within neural networks. Neural network is obviously just a metaphor for a computational brain. It actually has nothing to do with the human brain. We created an artwork which operated with plant signals, so recorded some of the signals that were generated out of living plants, and then we placed those through the adversarial network